Hello, it is on this day, August 10th, 2022, that I am talking about the surrounding feelings around accepting an identity. I'll get into what I mean by that in just a minute, but first we're going to talk about the layout of this video. We're going to start off by defining what I mean by the surrounding feelings. What am I referring to, and why they are important to talk about. And then I will dive into two anecdotes I have, two very different experiences that I am going through and or have gone through, and things that have helped me. And throughout this entire video I'm going to be talking about perspectives that I think are useful towards this topic. To start off, what do I mean by feelings around accepting your identity? I'm referring to fears, doubts, all those like negative emotions that people have when they've discovered something new about themselves, when they're still trying to work out part of themselves, when they're still trying to understand their identity. All of those feelings. There's a lot of feelings. A lot of people feel a lot of different things depending on their circumstances and all kinds of other various factors. And something I want to say here is that the vast majority of our community has this in some way, faces this at some point. Not everybody, but the vast majority understands this experience. And while it can really vary between people, it can happen with all kinds of age groups, it can happen with all kinds of time frames, it can happen with all kinds of labels, all kinds of identities. It can happen with labels and identities that are adjacent but not technically LGBTQ+, if that makes sense. And sometimes it's like an intersection between other parts of ourselves and a label. And all of these feelings are valid, and you probably aren't the only one who has gone through these feelings if you are going through these right now. You are not the only one. And I can tell you right now that I have gone through a lot of these feelings, and I still am going through some of these feelings, but I have learned how I personally navigate these, and I have learned how I can be happy with myself and be happy with who I am, even if I still have some fears and doubts. So it's a journey, it's a process. A lot of the things in this community are a journey and process. And in the end, it's figuring out what works for you, but this video hopefully will give guiding ideas on what can help you. With that note, we're going to get into anecdotes and start talking about specific perspectives that are helpful. So the first anecdote, the longer of the two anecdotes, is my trans crisis. In the end, I thought I was ready for my trans crisis on some level. I mean, I wasn't actually thinking about the possibility. I wasn't ready for the possibility. But since I was accepting of the idea of being non-binary, I thought, oh, I'd be fine. I was not fine. I can be very blunt and straightforward that I was not fine. And the first piece of advice is that it's okay to not be fine. Like, I know that sounds like negative. I mean that in a positive way. I mean that it's okay to go through negative emotions. As humans, we go through negative emotions. Sometimes we have to let it out. Sometimes we have to go through a lot of different feelings, a lot of different experiences. It's fine, it's valid, and it doesn't mean that you aren't that label. Just because you have doubts, just because you have fears, just because you have a breakdown, you're not positive towards it, none of that has to mean that you aren't that label. So, after that note, I had a complete shutdown. And the reason I am being very blunt and straightforward about this is because this is one of the moments in my life where I had the most of these fears, the most of these doubts, the most of these panicking moments. I felt so lost with who I was. I felt like the world was changing around me. And I'll explain like the whole story in my trans identity video, but the general idea is that I was alone. It was past midnight. Most of my friends were asleep. Eventually, I got in contact with one friend, but he didn't really understand what I was talking about. Really, what that time period was for me, that very initial time period in that case, what that time period was for me is the time to face what I was feeling. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't thinking about where we'd go. I wasn't even working on accepting it yet. I was just working on knowing that I felt this, recognizing that I was feeling something, recognizing that I felt something was wrong in that moment. That's it. That was all I had to do, was just, this is something that happened to me. Period. And so, just throughout the entire thing, because I wasn't having contact with people, it just, their fear after fear after fear after fear was coming up. My brain was basically trying to drown itself in all these different negative emotions. And I just rode the wave. And I rode the wave again with that, this is something I am feeling. There isn't much I can do about it right now, but I am recognizing all the things that are coming up. And I'm remembering that this happened. Next day comes around, still didn't feel great, and still was kind of doing the same thing, but in a more open way. Since a lot of my emotions were drained at that point, a lot of it was, hey, hi, this is something I experienced, this is something that happened to me. It doesn't have to mean anything yet. I haven't taken the steps yet. I'm not going to take the steps yet. I still need to get through this day. So I gave it another day. Advice number 2, it is okay to take time. It's okay to wait. It's okay to take time. Go at the rate that helps you. If you think it's too much to go too fast, don't go too fast. If you think you're going too slow, it's okay to go fast. Really, it's up to you. Whatever pace helps you navigate your identity, and whatever pace helps you slowly accept yourself step by step, or helps you consider the possibilities step by step. Really, take the pace that helps you. And it is okay to take time. So in my case, I had to take like 1 to 2 days. I had a lot of emotions going on. It was a lot to take in all at once. And I wasn't ready to take that in. I was still in school. I had to go to classes later on in that day and do my homework. And so there was a lot of layers to it. But eventually, after some time has passed, I finally came to the question of, what does this mean? My next piece of advice, we're going to have 2 pieces of advice here, but the first one is, ask yourself questions. I mean, I know that sounds like how do I word this answer? There's no good way to word this, so I apologize ahead of time, but kind of like the therapist perspective. Ask yourself questions. But I seriously think it's helpful. And even if you don't think it will work, just ask yourself the questions. And if you don't have the answers, that's fine. That means that you don't have the answers. But if you ask yourself a question and you're just like, well, I guess I should think about that, then it gives you something to do. It gives you somewhere to go. And it makes it so you aren't as lost. So those 2 days, I felt lost. It was something that I couldn't even address yet because I didn't have the means to address it. But after that time period when I was like, what next? What do I do with this information? That was the moment where I had the opportunity, key word there, the opportunity to open the doors. And that is my next piece of advice. Take a chance. Take a chance just to recognize that there are paths. Take the chance to recognize that that is where your control is. Maybe you don't have control in what you're experiencing. Maybe you don't have control in your identity. Maybe you can't control all these emotions and feelings you're having based on panic, fear, all those things about that identity. Where your control comes in is where you go. Your control comes in with recognizing the options, recognizing the doors. Sometimes you don't see them right away, but I promise you that if you take a chance and you breathe and consider this as an opportunity, you could see some doors open up. One of the things that my therapist told me is that, especially with trans individuals, it can be hard to recognize this as an opportunity. It can be hard to actually accept this as something they've experienced and accept it as something that they can take steps. Accept it as something that even had a door. They just assume that the door is shut. And that was something that I considered for a hot minute. When I say hot minute, I mean a small period of time. But I'm just not built that way. I can't ignore something that I know happened to me. And so instead, when I found that I just can't be that way, I was like, what can I do to make myself not feel so towards the mere idea of this being something I experienced? And my next piece of advice, something that helped me, is do research. Educate yourself. I think that educating yourself doesn't have to mean that you are that identity. It doesn't have to mean that you have already committed yourself one way or another. It really, what it's doing is it's teaching you and making you recognize it as a possible identity, recognize it's a possibility, recognize it's a door, and recognize that it's a door that other people have taken before. And in the long run, even if you end up finding out that maybe you aren't that identity for one reason or another, or whatever, any which way, there's no harm in educating yourself on the label. There's no harm in educating yourself on the community. Period. There really isn't. There's no harm. And so, educate yourself. Do some research. And sometimes you can do research into things that you aren't comfortable with. You can do research with things that you think will never matter to you. But even if it never matters to you, it still puts you in that perspective. It still shows you another way to view the world. And it really immerses you into the idea of accepting these things. Even if you're not doing it on purpose, even if you're not recognizing that's what it's doing, by educating yourself, by watching videos on how stuff works, by learning about testosterone level or whatever. There's all kinds of examples. By learning about what it means, by learning that it's natural in nature, whatever facts you come across, you are just maybe unintentionally, maybe intentionally implanting this seed in your brain that is normal and possible for you. And I think that's a good step to take. Just whatever it takes to not force yourself one way, but still open more doors, even if you're not meaning to do it. Take a chance. And I think that is a chance to take. That is something I did, and that's something that helped me significantly right off the bat, was educating myself on trans people. And I had trans friends. I knew some of the most basic things they experienced, but no, I did not know the facts. I didn't know a thing. I didn't understand, like, hormone treatment at all. I didn't understand, like, all kinds of things. There was a lot I didn't understand about the trans experience, and et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of better words to use there. And so I educated myself on it. I watched videos that I thought I would never watch in my lifetime. And even if I didn't think they mattered to me at that time, even if though they might now, it really opened my mind. It gave me an open perspective towards, like, this is something that people do. This is something that people choose to do. This is something that makes people happy. And that's my next thing. Looking at how accepting this identity, accepting various things related to the identity, made other people happy. However that is. Whether it's watching, like, really fluffy, romantic, adorable videos of, like, couples and marriages and, like, transition stories, and watching people just, like, having this, like, happy crying moments when they, like, see their surgery results or whatever it takes. Whatever that is for you. Or if it's seeing the more serious stuff, but generally seeing that they are just more positive as a person, seeing that they are more straightforward as a person, seeing that they are just themselves in a very simple manner, even if it's not like a very happy one. Just seeing them live their life. However that is for you, looking at those resources can help. And, sometimes maybe it can hurt depending on your mood at that time. And what I mean by that is like, sometimes it can hurt because you see it as something you don't have. Envy, those kinds of feelings. But at the right times, taking the chance, watching those things, and again, seeing that other people are content with this choice, seeing that other people are happy that they accepted themselves, seeing that other people are content with where they've gone, is a very positive outlook. So that is also, unintentionally most of the time, opening more doors. It's opening the doors of the possibilities that basically say I can have a future. The things that say I can be happy in my future. And accepting that idea for yourself, even if you aren't doing it intentionally. This is the next point. The next piece of advice I'm going to have is going to be a kind of negative one to think about. And a lot of people say it. Some people disagree with the sentiment. Up to you. But I personally kind of agree with the sentiment. I don't think it applies to everyone, but I pretty much agree with it. And that is that denying it won't make it go away. You'll notice that I waited multiple steps before I say this. For me, in my trans anecdote, denying it came later on. Like, at first, I was all about, what do I do, what do I do, what do I do, what's the next step, what does this mean, doing research. All right, I have all this information. Does it fit me? Do I want to deny it fits me? And denying it won't make it go away. Even if it feels like it will for a long time, even if, like, you think you can get away with it, most of the time, from a lot of the examples we see, it doesn't change that experience. And we see examples where some people can deny it for a lot of their life, and then later in their life they accept it. And one of the quotes that I see a lot, and something that I've reflected on a lot after hearing this, is, I feel like I missed so much of my life. Again, this is the most positive view. I just want to emphasize that. But that perspective of feeling like you missed so much of your life is a common experience. And it's something I feel. I'm like 19 years old, right? That shouldn't be something I'm feeling. But I really do. I feel like my high school years could have been completely different. It could have been happier. It could have been more positive if I had actually accepted some things when they first came up. Because let me tell you, a lot of the first gender things I felt were in high school, but I denied it at that time period. And I can flat out tell you that now. And that denial didn't help me. And now that I look back at it, I realize that I probably would have been happier. I would have gotten in less arguments with my parents and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, if I had considered it then, if I had seen it as a possibility. I didn't. I can't change that. But recognizing that there's a positive outlook in accepting this earlier, there's a positive outlook in postponing the denial and just seeing where it takes me. And I just don't recommend having that denial, because sometimes later on it just causes more negative feelings. With that, we'll get into my next anecdote, which is regarding an identity I'm not going to be able to describe to you guys. It's very complicated, it's very layered, but the general idea is that there's this fear that I built in high school. The fear at the most basic level has technically changed, but it's still the same general fear because it's about the same subject, if that makes sense. So there's this fear I've been feeling for a long time. And it's a fear that only recently, the last year and a half, I've been directly combating. I had been doing it accidentally for a while, but the last year and a half, I have been facing it directly. It is something that I have been it's something that I recognized I wasn't happy with myself with. Next piece of advice, sometimes reflecting and being like, is there anything I'm unhappy with right now? Is there anything that's bothering me? Because there are some things in, like, our identity, some things in how we live our lives, I guess, that we think are just part of who we are and that there's nothing we can do about it. But there are times that you can change what it is. Again, this is not like a label identity, this is like part of your identity in general. So there's this part of my identity in general that I was like, I don't like this about myself. It feels wrong. It feels like a lie I've told myself, and I just haven't realized it was a lie until now. And I started fighting it, and one of the things that helped me in fighting this fear I've had for so long is seeing how it's changed, seeing how it's weakened. So, next piece of advice, reflect back as time passes. Sometimes these things take time, and recognizing how your emotions change through different stages of your exploration really helps you with finding those positive emotions, finding those things that like lets you see that you are changing for the better, lets you see that you are being happier, lets you see that maybe there is some like worth in this possibility, lets you see the reason to take more chances, to keep going. So that's very helpful. And there's a point in which, in my case, the fears and doubts, even if you're still feeling them, don't matter. And it's not that they aren't there, because they are there, and it's not that they still aren't, like, it's not that they aren't having an impact, because they are. I can tell you right now that last night I had a moment. I had like not like a very bad moment, but I still got kind of angry and ranty about this fear that I'm still having. I think it's absurd that I'm still having this fear. But I've reached the point in which I can recognize the fear as something that is not going to change my identity. I've reached the point that I can set my fears aside from who I am and recognize who I am. Part of that is because I've been doing this for a while. And when I say a while, I mean less than a year. But, you know, enough of a time that I've been able to say, hey, this fear, it is separate. It's something that I can distinguish. It is something that I can just be like, you aren't real for me. You are something I am experiencing. You are something that it is valid for me to experience, but you aren't something that is part of me in terms of who I am. And so because of that, I can still live with this positivity. I can still live with the idea that I can still change. I can still fix this. Even if I'm scared of changing, even if I have a fear that when I, like, even though this fear makes me think that it's negative, the path I'm going, I can still think about how my path has been changing so far, how much happier I've been along the way, and look at this fear and be like, no, 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 no. It's frustrating, it's annoying. I have an entire video where I rant about it. I may post that one day. I recorded it last night. But I can look at this fear and pretty much say it's stupid. And you know what? I can wake up the next morning, today, and just be like, I love my life. So it's really finding the path for you. Again, a lot of these pieces of advice are things that worked for me and very general statements, but really find what makes you happy. Find that part of your identity. Maybe you don't see the happiness, and I know a lot of ACE people who struggle accepting their ACE identity because they can't see the happiness in being ACE. That's just one label, but there are other similar labels that do that. Just an example. And I get that. That took me a long time. My ACE identity is one of the ones that I struggled to be happy about because, you know, it's hard. But there's a point in which you can find it. It really depends on you as an individual, but I'm telling you, you can find your happiness. You can. It's there. It's out there somewhere. And even if you're a pessimist like me, you look at everything in like a negative light, you assume the worst in all cases, you can still find it. It is there. And maybe you don't see it directly, but even if you don't see it directly, personally, you can still see it with other people. You can still see it with society. You can see how society is slowly changed for the better on some levels. And you can see the possibility. You can see the chances. And really, the biggest thing in this video I want to point out is you have the chance to recognize the possibility of change. You have the chance to change. And it's okay to change. It's okay to accept part of who you are. It's okay to take time. Everything about your experience is valid. And even if you have these fears, even if you have these doubts, even if you have all the kinds of emotions, even if you genuinely don't think it is who you are, it's still okay to explore. And there's nothing wrong with picking up a label and putting it down. And there's nothing wrong with not being entirely sure. And there's nothing wrong with questioning. And there's nothing wrong with not having a label. You don't have to label everything. Labels are just these ideas to help us navigate who we are and understand who we are. And even though some of our community makes it sound like it's a requirement to have a label, it really isn't. So navigate your journey, navigate who you are, and just know that no matter what you're feeling is valid. The last point I want to make is one last thing that helped me. And that last thing is getting a gender and sexuality therapist. Again, this is not like a solution for everybody. This is not something that everybody wants to do. And interestingly enough, this is not something I wanted to do. I never thought I would get a therapist in my life. It wasn't something that I thought I needed. But in that moment with my trans crisis, I felt so lost on another level. And some of my fear was that all my trans friends were going to give me a bias. And I don't mean that negatively. I didn't think it was a negative thing to have that bias. But I still was like, I need to make sure that it's not because of my friends that I am trans. It's something that I was worried about. And it's not unreasonable to worry about those things. Maybe, and I can tell you for me, it wasn't true. But regardless, it's okay to be worried about those kinds of things. And so I was so lost. I was so confused. It was a free resource for me, so I reached out to that resource, and I am so thankful. And this goes back to the idea of recognizing doors, recognizing the chance to do something. I recognized the chance to get a therapist. I wasn't very happy with the idea. I was absolutely terrified when I was in that waiting room. I cannot describe to you how much my heart was beating when I was in that waiting room. But it changed my life for the better. I am so glad I did it. She is such an amazing person. I love her so much. And it's nice to just have an outside perspective, have someone that can just ask the few questions you need. It really depends on your experience, but my experience with my therapist, it was a lot of me asking her questions, me just kind of spewing some of my perspective, and her listening, and only sometimes asking one question, one little leading question. And it makes a difference just having someone there to listen, someone to ask the small questions. And something I love about sexuality and gender therapists specifically is that they kind of get some of the experience. In fact, they can share some of their experience to help you reflect on yours. And they remind you that no two people have the same experience. One of the things that I freaking love that my therapist taught me is that, hey, attraction is an abstract concept. Hey, you and I don't feel attraction the same way. Here's how I felt attraction. And I know that that's not how other people feel it. And that's okay. It may sound simple now that I'm saying it, and, it sounds obvious to me now, but at that time period, that wasn't obvious to me. And it helped me so much. It helped me so freaking much. And now that's one of the biggest things that helped me accept my ace identity. So I can recommend getting a sexuality and gender therapist if it's an available resource to you. If it's not an available resource to you, friends, discussions, web pages, social media, YouTube. Explore the internet. There are all kinds of resources. There's the Asexuality Visibility Education Network. There's all kinds of like hotlines that you can call and be like, hey, can I talk to someone who is non-binary? There's a lot of those hotlines if you go and search out there. And there's a lot of resources specific to regions. There's a lot of like meetups, clubs. If you are in school, there's a lot of like school groups. There's a lot of like national chapters and societies that you can be a part of. There are a lot of groups if you look out there, and sometimes just talking to other people is a really helpful resource. So that's all I have for this video. I apologize for this being 30 minutes long, but this is something that I think is very important to talk about, and I know some of those negative feelings. I know how down you can feel when you feel like your life is flipped. I get that. And I really just want to end this by saying I'm so fucking happy. I can't convey to you how happy I am. And I could not have seen this in my life like months ago. Like months ago, I could not have seen this YouTube channel in my life. I couldn't have seen this level of happiness in my life. This is not something I ever would have thought possible for me. But it happened, and it's just mostly because I took a few leaps. And it worked out for me. So look at other people's perspectives, and I wish you good luck on your journey. I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.